Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Jessica DeGanzik, the Vice President of Events for the Los Angeles World Affairs Council and Town Hall. We are pleased to welcome you to today's program, A Diplomat's Bold Vision for the Future of the United Arab Emirates. Our speaker today is His Excellency Omar Ghobash, the United Arab Emirates Assistant Minister for Culture and Public Diplomacy. Ambassador Ghobash has been called the new face of UAE Diplomacy and Tolerance. He previously served as UAE's ambassador to France and to Russia, and is the author of the book, Letters to a Young Muslim. He will be in conversation with Daniel Egel, a senior economist at RAND's Center for Middle East Public Policy. A special thank you to Consul General Hazza Al-Kabi and the United Arab Emirates Consulate here in Los Angeles, and to our event partners, the Pacific Council and RAND's Center for Middle East Public Policy. We'll be taking your questions in about 35 minutes. You can submit your question by entering them on the questions section on the control panel, which is on the right-hand side of your screen, and I'll try to get to as many of those as we possibly can. Daniel, thank you so much for leading today's conversation. I'll turn this over to you and Ambassador Ghobash and be back in about 35 minutes to share questions from our audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jessica, and good morning, Ambassador. I'd like to start off by thanking the Los Angeles World Affairs Council for hosting this event and all our listeners for joining in today. I think it'll be a really interesting conversation. Ambassador, if you're willing, I'd like to start off by discussing your book, and I'll show it here to our listeners, Letters to a Young Muslim, written in 2017 as a series of letters to your eldest son. It tells I think, a really remarkable story of the social, economic, and political transformation over the last 50 years. It also, it speaks to the youth of today in the Middle East, talking about their challenges, talking about the problems that they face. I think reflecting on your own personal story. And I think it just offers a remarkable story about growing up in the Middle East, growing up in the Emirates. And I would recommend it to anyone who wants to understand the region, wants to understand a vision for tolerance for the region. So if you, Ambassador, if you would, I might start off by talking about the history, the evolution you've seen in the Middle East, in the Emirates over the last 50 years. As I'm sure you well know, in December, you'll mark the 50th anniversary of the UAE. A remarkable country, has transformed remarkably in the last 50 years. If you could talk a bit about the change that you've seen over the last 50 years.
Thank you very much for having me on, and thank you for bringing up my book. I mean, I assumed that it might, kind of last a week or maybe at most a month, but people are still bringing it up, and I in fact recently saw it in one of the bookshops here in Los Angeles. So I was very pleased. The interesting thing for me also is that I was born in the year of the Federation. So, we celebrate the Federation's 50th anniversary. I just recently celebrated my own 50th birthday, and there's kind of a parallel between, the way in which I look back at my own life, and I also look back at the way our society has developed. I've also started looking a little further back to see the actual miracle of the Emirates, because it really does seem like a miracle to people like me and people who are older. And in trying to explain that to a younger generation where they've been brought up in a completely different environment. So I've been looking at the 60s and the 50s, and it is actually astounding the transformation of our society from what was essentially a desert and very, very tribal society where illiteracy was, sky high. Existence was very, very difficult, tenuous. And if you lived to the age of 5, you were regarded as something of a miracle. And there is one of our citizens is 105 at the moment, and he's still going strong. So it's just like it's remarkable to think that's how we were, and questions of mortality were really very serious. We have a family diary where going back to the turn of the century, where it was just a list of every single newborn that died and the cause of death. And now, we look at the Emirates after unification. We've gone through this massive process of wealth distribution, essentially, creation of institutions, the creation of a greater sense of identity as a unit of a state, as opposed to being tribal or family oriented. And we've got a whole new generation of kids who are coming to the U.S. and to some of the top universities in the U.S. and the Western world. And it's just amazing to be able to see that happening. So we've moved from being a very tribal society to now making a play to become a global platform, whether it's in the sciences or logistics or international aid, and just makes me very proud to be able to be part of it.
Well, that's great. And one of the things I'll do at the end is ask you to talk about where you think the Emirates is going
Sure.
at the end of the conversation today. But there's one theme, well, you pick up a bunch of wonderful themes in your book. One of the themes that really resonated with me was your experience growing up mixed race in the United Arab Emirates. This is something that's personal to me. My wife is mixed race, and a lot of our interactions with the world are through that prism. And I think it's something that probably resonates with many of the community in Los Angeles who have families of different backgrounds. It's just, you offer a remarkable story in your book about that. I was wondering if you might talk a bit about your own experience and how that shaped your own trajectory.
Sure. So for the record, my father is Emirati. He comes from the Northern Emirates, and due to very kind of restrictive financial resources, he was compelled to take up a scholarship in the Soviet Union. Innocently thinking he's going to get an education. And the reality, of course, was this was part of an attempt to, sort of nurture an elite across the Arab world. I think the Soviets had a program of about 2,000 scholarships for the region in the 60s. By that time, my father was already in his early 30s. And 4 years later, he came back with a Russian wife, who is my wonderful mother. And it was chance, it was circumstance, but what he did was essentially it was quite a bold kind of breaking of taboos in our region, where you don't marry outside of the family or the tribe or certainly not the ethnicity. And we have a little document. He had sent a telegram to the ruler of the Emirate, asking for permission in the 1960s to marry a Russian lady. And so the answer came back, says, yes, you can go ahead and do that. And now the end result of that was, four children growing up in Abu Dhabi. And I have to be honest, looking back, our childhood was a little difficult because we were kind of the first biracial children in the area. We certainly didn't know anybody else who was Emirati with foreign blood. But as time went by, it began to present itself as a massive opportunity and a massive resource because I speak English as a first language. We have access to all of our Arabic cultural resources, but at the same time, I had the perspective of Russian literature and a Russian mother. So I brought her Dostoevsky an approach to life, and it served me in some ways, and it's kind of been tough in other ways. But the multiplicity of perspectives has allowed me to be friendly with everybody and serve as a diplomat in many different places. What's also turned up is that over the last few decades, more and more Emiratis have married foreigners, and so now we have. I can tell you, we have Emiratis who speak Mandarin fluently because their mothers are Chinese. We have Italians, Spaniards, Africans, so from the subcontinent. So we have this kind of network of young Emiratis who have very kind of multidimensional personalities and talents, and we're looking to bring that into to serving the nation. To be honest.
Well, wonderful. So I want to turn to some foreign affairs issues because I think that these are pressing on people's minds.
Sure.
And then we can turn back a little bit to the conversation you just laid there, because I think it speaks to where the Emirates are going and what the future will bring. But let me first ask you about Afghanistan, because it's a topic that weighs heavy, I think, on many people's minds. It's a country where your country, the Emirates, have invested a lot. I had a chance to see the sacrifices that your countrymen made personally. With the Emirati Special Forces spent years living in Afghan villages, working with local communities, building their economies, their political systems. Wonderful sacrifice. And more recently, the Emirates played a leading role in the escapees, taking the evacuation of folks out of Afghanistan, and most recently have started pushing humanitarian assistance into Afghanistan. So I'm wondering, what do you see as UAE's commitment to Afghanistan going forward?
I think, well, obviously we've been monitoring Afghanistan since the late 80s, and we've had, well, early 80s to be honest, and we've also witnessed kind of the breakdown of Afghanistan and the rise of Islamic extremism, whether that was Al-Qaeda going back to the 1990s, early 2000s, and the Taliban. We've come out very strongly in the last few years in favor of a more diverse understanding of religion, a more tolerant approach to outsiders, from our own community, and we're really making concrete steps to clarify that that is our moral and ethical position as a state and as a community in the Emirates. So to see what's happening today in Afghanistan, it was not desired, not expected, and something of a surprise. On the other hand, it's an ancient society, and it's not to be expected that you can change something like that overnight. We're very, very concerned about women's issues and women's rights in Afghanistan, and I think we've been consistent about the promotion of women within Islamic societies. And you can see from the experience of the Emirates, we have so many senior figures in the government and in civil society who are female, and they're promoted and protected in that sphere. So for us to see this turning back in the name of Islam, from sort of women's education or women's role in public life, it's extremely disappointing. And we will do whatever we can to encourage the authorities in Afghanistan to rethink and reconsider. And of course, we spend a lot of time and a lot of money assisting in the evacuation of foreigners from Afghanistan and Afghans who have the right to leave. It's only part of what we hope we can do. And ultimately, we'd love to see Afghanistan being a kind of a prosperous country, taking real care of its natural resources and its human potential. And I think over the last 20 years, its human potential has really been able to shine forth. And it's so unfortunate that the current authorities can't see that as a blessing as opposed to some form of a curse.
Yeah, I will say when I worked with your Emirati forces, one of the things that they provided for the NATO mission was an ability to communicate with local communities,
Sure.
to be sort of an authority on Islam. I mean,
Yeah.
do you see a public diplomacy role for the Emirates in Afghanistan, or is it too soon right now to answer that question?
I'd say, yeah, it is a bit too soon. Also, we've taken quite a change in our approach to regional issues over the last couple of years. I think COVID had an effect, but also sort of the developments across the region. We've now decided to focus much more on our internal security, on our economic growth within. We'd love to be able to solve the problems of the region and of the world, but we're actually finding that our attention is probably better focused inwards at the moment. We'll still, of course, continue to do our part as members of the international community. We're very, very keen on supporting multilateral institutions, and we're very keen also on supporting smaller states like ourselves. And I don't know if your viewers know, but we're taking our seat at the Security Council in the next few months, and this is also it's a huge obligation and it's huge responsibility. So our focus will be on trying to represent well both the Arab world and the smaller states that face many of the similar issues that we face. So we'll be trying to support as much as possible that multilateral kind of approach to problem solving.
Okay, and that's a great transition to the next question, which is about the Abraham Accords.
Yeah.
As many in the audience will likely know, the Abraham Accord celebrated its first anniversary, I think, just 2 weeks ago on September 15th. And for those that don't know, the Abraham Accords was what I think of it as the first major movement, positive movement forward towards peace in the Middle East in the last 20 years. It was led by Israel and the United Arab Emirates, working together over many years to sign a pact of political and economic normalization. So question for you, Ambassador. Most of the discussion around the Abraham Accords has focused on the economic benefits. And in passing, people mention people-to-people opportunities. And I'm
Yeah.
wondering if you could speak a bit more about what that means to you and what it means to the Abraham Accords.
Yeah, I've noticed also that there's a great deal of focus on, the economic benefits and the economic prospects and the amount of trade that's going to take place, and that is all very important and it shows a sign of optimism and desire. It kind of provides goals to work for. Myself, I have a better understanding perhaps than some of your viewers on how we operate as investors. I know for a fact that a lot of our private sector investors, they know their market and they like their market, and they feel more comfortable at home. So the idea that all of a sudden there's going to be a massive amount of investment abroad into Israel, potentially, but I don't think it's particularly likely. There's probably going to be an investment, at the personal level into real estate, in Israel. I think there's a lot of curiosity in terms of tourism, and we're nomads by nature and traders by sea as well historically. And so we're always very curious about about places that we haven't been allowed to go into before. So I know, I speak to Emiratis all the time, and we're always saying, who's going next? And I'm planning a trip to Israel fairly soon as well. I think on the people-to-people front, so on the economic front, we have the private sector, which may or may not take up the challenge, but then we have the sovereign wealth funds that have more strategic approach to investment, and there are 2 or 3 strategic investments that will take place, I'm sure. There's been the investment into the gas fields with Delek, and then there's G42, which is a technology company based out of Abu Dhabi, which has been looking at technological partnerships. So they will be the driving force on those kinds of investments, and they will be sizable. But will they have that kind of cultural effect that we would hope that takes place? And I think it's on as you say, the people-to-people side. You're going to see, I think, more impact than on these large-scale investments. And the impact will be, well, we've already got students, Emirati students, who are now studying in Israeli universities. I know that there are a lot of Emirati students who want to study Hebrew. I was actually giving some advice to a friend of mine a couple of days ago. He wanted a website that he could go on to learn Hebrew. So I'm like, okay, here you are. So there's the tourism, there's the on the cultural sphere. I think what's going to happen with the start of the expo, there's going to be, there's obviously an Israeli pavilion there, and that's going to be a fantastic opportunity for us to be able to, as Emiratis, come and see what Israel is like at home, and that's very exciting. I think also we've got, as you know, we've got the Abrahamic family house. Which is a complex of a church, a synagogue, and a mosque coming up in Abu Dhabi. And I think there, we might even find that there's a form of religious tourism taking place. That should be fun. We also have a separate from the Israeli component, we've got a large or growing Jewish community, whether it's a permanently based one or it's a transient community of tourists coming in from Israel or from the ex-Soviet Union. And there are a number of now Jewish communities being kind of formed. One at least is more orthodox, one is a little more liberal, and they're continually coming into contact with Emiratis. So I'm very optimistic on the people-to-people front, and I actually think that is probably the most important element of the Abraham Accords. And I think we've faced criticism and sort of a downplaying of the importance of the Accords, that it didn't solve the Palestinian issue. Well, it didn't solve the Palestinian issue because the Palestinian issue is an extremely complex issue, but it is a stepping stone towards changing perceptions of what is possible in the Middle East, what can be expected of Muslims and Arabs, what is reasonable for Muslims and Arabs to do in the quest for peace. And also it opens the door to actually creating more points of contacts for the Israelis in the region to understand what are real concerns and what are perhaps hyped up concerns. So for me personally, to see the Abraham Accords being signed last year was a huge moral victory, I think, in a fight against hatred and in particular against anti-Semitism. So I would ask your viewers to reconsider and perhaps pay more attention to how the Abraham Accords can play out, rather than seeing it as an immediate result. this is a platform on which we can all build.
And I would say, on the economic side, at RAND, we've done a bit of analysis, and it's clear that progress is being made, and we think the economic potential is really, really large. And I'll come back to that in a second. I do think there are people that are, saying it's not such a big deal. But so one of the challenges that concerns that's often raised is the Palestinian issue. And your colleague, the former Emirati foreign minister, if I'm right, Dr. Barghash, said last week, and this is what this is his quote, that the Abraham Accords would allow us to help and assist further in the peace process, leading to what we all see as the ultimate goal of a two-state solution. So for the viewers, how do the Emirates see the Abraham Accords as helping support a two-state solution?
I think it's just opening up that idea of what we can do in the Middle East, because we've lived, at least for my lifetime, we've lived on these very, very heavy taboos that we would not be able to recognize Israel even on a map. I mean, we wouldn't produce our own maps. We'd import maps from the West, and if there was the name Israel was on it, we would the censors would scratch it out. I think also when it comes to understanding the concerns of Israelis, the security concerns of Israelis, I think it's exceptionally important for us to understand the experience of the Holocaust, for example. And I'm in Los Angeles, and I visited the Simon Wiesenthal Center and the Museum of Tolerance. And, it really occurred to me that it just shows how human we all are and how we're all fallible, and how the question of tolerance actually concerns every one of us. So there was a tremendous amount to learn there. I think the idea that we have broken through a massive taboo, and we're actually saying that we, in the Arab world, though we support sort of group ideals, we also are nations with our sovereignty. So the signing of the Abraham Accords, for me, I read it as a very clear signal that we're taking a step as a sovereign state with full agency and with full responsibility for the consequences. And rather than falling into kind of rhetorical arguments or accusatory arguments, we should actually think, okay, well, we have taken the step, other countries are taking the step. How do we now demonstrate that genuine results can be attained? And things don't happen overnight. We need to keep pushing. And without doubt, we will continue to support two-state solution and justice for the Palestinians. But things are based on a compromise, and it's something that we need to keep pushing.
You talked earlier about the importance of multilateral engagement, and one thing, the Abraham Accords. Yes, Israel and the UAE were at the heart of the Abraham Accords, but at its heart, my understanding was it was always intended to be a multilateral agreement. So I was wondering if you could speak a bit about the other signatories to the Accords, particularly Morocco and Sudan, which were part of the initial Accords, and what progress is being made with them in terms of deepening cultural, economic, political relations, and then also the potential for other nations around the globe to join. People floated other possible countries as possible signatories. Is there progress being made there? Are we going to see an expansion geographically of this over the next 5 to 10 years?
I can't really speak for other countries, but I will say that just thinking about this issue over the last few days, there's a reason why I believe that the focus on the Abraham Accords is on the accord between the Emirates and Israel. And I think it's because, well, the Emirates is a country that's in a hurry. It's in a hurry to make progress. It's in a hurry to develop its economy. We have very, very bold targets. The whole of the government infrastructure that we have is KPI oriented. Every time I speak in public, I get to tick another box as having performed my duties. There are not many countries in the Middle East that operate that way, and there are very few governments that operate that way, I'd say, in the Middle East. So, there are countries in the Middle East that potentially would want to sign a deal with Israel, but they have so many internal issues where they may not be able to face that taboo so straightforwardly. And so again, we're lucky that we have leadership that is very forward-thinking, but not only forward-thinking. Leave that to one side. Is actually much more concerned about the health of our economy and our society than perhaps other countries. And reaching out to Israel, there's a good reason apart from tolerance and peace. It's because Israel really is a powerhouse of intellectual kind of development and academic excellence and technological kind of excellence. And so, the Emirates sees itself as a global node. And it needs to connect with other nodes as well. We connected with the US and the West. We connected with the Indians and with the Chinese, and we need to connect with the Israelis too. There is, apart from the idealism, there are very serious reasons why we should connect with them. Increases our global.
Yeah, just one last question on the Accords.
Sure.
Do you think that they offer the potential for enhancing regional security?
Well, I think it's up to us to push for that. I mean, we are still working out the details of the accord between ourselves and the Israelis. I think a greater economic ties is going to help. I think greater understanding of each other's positions is going to help. The fact that we can now pick up the phone and speak to each other about regional questions is exceptionally important. And I was recently having a discussion with a senior official about this. My question to him was, how does it differ speaking for, to when you pick up the phone and you speak to an Arab colleague, or you pick up the phone and you speak to a Western colleague? What is the difference in tone? How much openness is there, and how much kind of cooperation is there? And I think in our part of the world, the Emirates, being a country that wants to work with others, understands the benefits of working with others, we will respond positively to openness and clarity. And that's going to get us much further. So I think the Israelis should understand that as well, that openness and clarity is going to be a great way to build relations in the region.
All right. At the beginning of the conversation, we talked about the first 50 years of the UAE, which overlap with your own 50 years.
Yes.
What do you see? What do you think is going to happen over the next 25 years? What are the major changes you see in the Emirates and in your region over the next 25 years?
Well, I'm hoping to lose about 20 pounds and to celebrate my 75th birthday with you. I think we're gonna see a really interesting kind of development of regional relations. People are going to begin to recognize increasingly that the government is there to serve the people, and you can serve the people even if you're in what you might call a monarchy, and you can have tremendous concern for the health of your society. So I think there's going to be, at least in the Emirates, we're looking at a really remarkable future ahead of us, and we're all sort of focused on building it. And that, again, comes to actually starting off with physical health. We're looking at the question of mental health, which is an issue that is hugely, again, taboo in the Middle East and in Arab society. This is, the subject that's being openly discussed. Recognition that we live in a globalized world and that we need to play according to those rules, but also to set incredibly high standards, and that there are no favors that we're going to be able to call in on or call on. And this is something that I'm teaching my children, and friends of ours are teaching their children, is that you can sort of talk about national pride, you can talk about ethnicity and purity of line and tribal affiliation, but actually we live in a global economy, and you're going to have to really get your act together. So we tell our kids, compete with the best in the world, don't compete with your neighbor. And once we see that kind of logic being spread across the Middle East, and I think you can see it already happening in places like Saudi Arabia, certainly Qatar and Bahrain. Egypt is looking fascinating in terms of its kind of technological startup scene and so on. I think there's going to be, we're optimists about the Middle East. And we're optimists partly because we take responsibility for our own society and economy, but also because we are very happy to share our experiences with sort of fellow governments across the region. So not just in the Middle East, but even Sub-Saharan Africa, Central Asia. So what are we going to do? We're going to have a healthy economy, healthy society, and we have KPIs to make us the #1 nation in the world. So we're going to get there.
Yeah, on the economic question, I'm an economist, so I'm always
Yes.
biased a little bit in that direction. One of the things people are warning us is that in the next 25 years, we're going to see the end of hydrocarbons. By 2015, the hydrocarbon era will be over. They'll still be around. And Abu Dhabi will probably still be selling it, but the revenue will be much less significant.
Yeah.
Do you think you guys are ready?
Today, no, I don't think we're ready. I think mentally we're ready. I think in terms of kind of forecasting, we are very, very clear about the realities out there. We will maximize. I know that we're going to maximize our potential profits from hydrocarbons going forward. At the same time, we're going to do our utmost to minimize the effect on climate and the environment. But we also, I mean, I can tell you just simply in terms of being a government bureaucrat, there have been massive cuts across the federal government. And the reality is that we've become more efficient. And that's a superb thing. We just become more efficient. And actually those who are proposing more efficient measures get more of a hearing now as well. It allows us to tap into young people's aspirations. They begin to feel that, hey, maybe I have a purpose in the office. That wasn't the case when I was in my 20s. At the time, the social contract essentially was, well, you've got a government job, enjoy it, right? You know, have a cigarette, have a cup of tea. Today, we don't have that environment, and it's fantastic. So I think we also, if you look at the various Emirates, I mean, Abu Dhabi is the hydrocarbon-rich Emirate, and it has its own challenges in terms of being cursed with natural resources. But the other Emirates are not so endowed. And you might look at Dubai as an example of what you can do when you have no natural resources, and that is to use your ingenuity as a natural resource. I think that's exactly what's happening in Dubai, and then across the smaller Emirates, which unexpectedly are actually doing much better than people might have imagined 20 years ago.
Well, I might close this out and then we could turn to questions. But let me close out by returning back to your book. And it's, again, you cover many themes, but I think the overarching theme is this story about tolerance.
Yeah.
And overall, you know, how do you create tolerance? How do you teach the youth tolerance? I mean, I think you reflect on your own personal experience growing up and the experience of your son watching him grow up. What, you know, if you could talk briefly about, you know, the key observations that you've had, but then also what are the pragmatic steps that we can take? You know, we can take here in the West, that the United States can take. Again, you know, this is a challenge. You know, I have small children, a little bit younger than yours, but this is something that I'm looking forward to, these challenges going forward. So, you know, what would be your lessons and what's your vision, if you will, for a region that's more tolerant and more understanding?
Good question. It's a question that I think about quite often. You know, recently we celebrated we celebrated the Year of Tolerance in the Emirates, and it was very interesting because it brought forth the it underlined the value of tolerance. But one thing that I noticed was that we weren't fully developing these ideas around tolerance. So it was basically a marker saying, okay, yes, we are tolerant. And you know, the practical example of the Emirates is one of tolerance and openness and you know, sort of reliance on trade, but we hadn't really kind of theorized it. And I did come across a couple of comments online, which were very important, which was basically, what are the limits of our tolerance? If we tolerate everybody and everything, then have we not lost our own identity? And so, yeah, for me, it becomes a question of, okay, I am tolerant, but at some stage, I need to still maintain kind of the vessel of my personality and my body. And I found it very interesting over the last couple of days when I visited the Museum of Tolerance in Los Angeles to find that actually the first half of the experience didn't touch on religion or ethnicity at all. It was one where the focus was on understanding that there is not only your perspective, but other perspectives. And they do this, you know, with visual media in a very, very smart way. And then the structuring of arguments around contentious issues. One thing, you know, one argument can seem incredibly reasonable until you hear the countering argument, which can also be very reasonable. And just having that happen to me was really eye-opening, because these are almost technical measures to underline how tolerance can be developed, or your attention can be brought to it. So I was actually thinking that that might be a great idea to bring back home and to create, you know, these experiences where you see what it's like. Also, you know, we do have these very important ideas of national pride and ethnic pride. And the question is, how do you tone that down so that it isn't vicious or vindictive or angry, but it can be celebrated along with the pride of others. And I think what we're doing, with the construction of, for example, a Hindu temple in Abu Dhabi, and synagogues sprouting up all over the Emirates, it's an important way of showing that it's normalizing the presence of others. And then, the outreach of these different communities into the Arab and Muslim communities has been very important as well. I think it's difficult to hate somebody when they're so friendly. And it forces you to rethink your stand, whether it's so necessary to be so aggressive. So, these are just a few impressions that I've gathered over the last few days, which are really valuable for me.
Well, wonderful, Jessica. I might turn it back to you for questions from the listeners.
Great. Thank you so much, Daniel and Ambassador Ghobash. Before we launch into the Q&A session, I would like to thank our members and viewers for your continued support. We depend upon your donations and membership to cover our expenses so that we can continue to bring you these important discussions. If you are able to make a donation, please go to our website, lawacth.org, and click on the donate button or become a member. We greatly appreciate it. All right, let's jump into these questions. All right, Ambassador Ghobash, how have the recent elections in Iran changed the dynamics in the greater Gulf region?
Good question. I think I think it's probably more the Biden position on the nuclear agreement that has changed the dynamics in the region. I don't think that we have any great expectations for Iranian democracy. We know that it's a very limited field. The candidates can have to pass all kinds of stringent tests. But we have actually reached out to the Iranians, and we have congratulated their president on his election. And to be honest, I mean, the winds of change are in the region, and so we have paid visits to Iran. We've looked at sort of previously unfriendly countries such as Qatar and Turkey. And we are making pragmatic changes in our policies towards all of these countries. Of course, in the expectation that they will also respect our interests and our sovereignty and integrity. So we are, I suppose, are biding our time like many other countries, but we are also making sure that we have as good relations as possible in the meantime.
Thank you. Your bio shows that you're very involved in the arts. How do you see arts and culture influencing the modern Islamic world, and what is the response by more fundamentalist Muslims to modern art?
Yeah, well, I think like many of us, they don't understand modern art. I think, look, what happened in the Emirates is that because we had such an influx of different nationalities, a lot of people kind of reacted to this influx in different ways. So culture is upset, culture is kind of scratched and irritated, and all of a sudden this leads to an outpouring of expression. And if you look at a place like Dubai, which has a very, very dynamic cosmopolitan community, we have a lot of artistic production there, which is absolutely fabulous. And I think there are norms change, and there was a time in neighboring countries in the 50s and 60s where, and even up to the late 80s and 90s, where the idea of representation was not accepted. But modern technology, the desire to participate in the modern world, allows you to kind of break down the integrity or the coherence of those positions. And so increasingly, these places are producing really remarkable works, very introspective, very revealing works. I know that, the Saudis are very interested in promoting their own art scene, and they have this huge focus on the creative economy and tourism, looking at ancient artifacts that don't necessarily gel 100% with an Islamist interpretation of history. I think that we're across the Arab world, there is more of an interest in our own heritage, and our own rather than constructed and imagined heritage, the actual reality of our heritage. So just looking at there are Jewish tombstones in the northern Emirates. There's a church that was discovered from, I think it was about 600 AD on one of the islands in Abu Dhabi. Art and religion are so intertwined in our part of the world that these are important kind of markers.
This next questioner says, I would be interested in the ambassador's position on the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah. Also, I hope he might be on the Combatants for Peace tour this November.
Okay, on very specific technical questions, I am not the person to speak to. Again, you know, we want to see justice for Palestinians inside Israel proper and outside. I think one of the things that this is kind of a tangent to that question. One of the very interesting kind of aspects of the Palestinian-Israeli issue is the position of Palestinian Israelis, who, you know, there's 1.5 million people. And in the debates across the Arab world, nobody's ever heard their voices. And I think they would provide a very interesting perspective on what it means to be a part of the Israeli state, and yet, or rather, Israeli nation, and yet also part of the Arab and Muslim world. I think just on the subject of tolerance, that might, you know, crack open some very interesting ideas. On being part of this tour, I would happily join, but I have to get permission of my boss. So send me the invite, and I'll see if I can join.
Perfect. All right. Well, Russia is in the news a lot in the United States. So can you discuss your experience as ambassador to Russia? What is the relationship with the UAE and Russia, and how does that complicate relations with the US?
Oh, I don't think it complicates relations at all. I've always been very consistent about this. Our relationship with the United States is it's part of our identity, and I hope the Americans understand that. It really is part of our identity. We've had so many students come to the US to study. This is where they've had their formative experiences. They've sort of acquired so many of the different kind of cultural markers of being in the US. Apologies for that. I got excited. My siblings all studied in the US. I was an Anglophile until I got to England, but it was too late by then. So I got a British education. But my oldest son is studying in the United States. So there is nothing that really competes with the US in the region, in the Gulf states. You can have you can have friendly political relations with the Russians and the Chinese and so many other, but the cultural force of the US is something that cannot be competed with. So whatever I did in Russia was, there are a couple of things. I mean, you need to work with countries on intelligence cooperation, particularly in the time of ISIS and the situation in Syria and the rise of radical Islam and so on. And I always made the argument that Russia had points of leverage across the Middle East because they had, I mean, their foreign ministry is very, very Arabist, and they really do have very important networks that we have managed to tap into and to focus, well, to work with. I really don't see the relationship with Russia or China as a threat to our relationship with the US. And as I say, we have very good relations with those countries, but the cultural aspect, the cultural angle of our relationship with the US is immovable. So that's a good thing.
Yep. What role do you think science diplomacy will play in the United Arab Emirates' future?
Well, since I've just been given the responsibility for handling science and technology policy within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I think it's going to play a huge role in the future. We're actually working with a number of our ministries. So the Ministry of Advanced Technology and Industry, the Ministry of Food Security, Climate Change, digital economy and artificial intelligence. We're working on activating our network of diplomats abroad. Now we have diplomats in 100 countries. And we're reaching out to industry associations, to universities, to governments, to maximize the possible involvement of their scientific and entrepreneurial communities in the Emirates. And again, we provide, the Emirates provides a fantastic kind of a platform and a hub and a connector with many different parts of the world. And we've seen, quite over the course of COVID, we've seen quite a large influx of technology entrepreneurs into the Emirates for all kinds of reasons. And it's almost as though we're creating a kind of a cluster of people as opposed to institutions or companies. So I'm very excited about it. I think it's going to be well, like everything good, it's going to be uphill. It's going to be a lot of work, but there is a huge amount of potential there. I think you know that we're quite keen on our space exploration, and so we've sent you know that we've sent a probe to Mars, and it's collecting data at the moment. There's a big focus in government on supporting STEM subjects, so the sciences. We have a lot of students who are now studying the sciences abroad. And we're also developing local universities, you know, in cooperation with Western universities, and in one case even with the Chinese. So there's a big focus on leveraging technology and really kind of creating an intellectual base within the Emirates. And it includes, I have to say, very importantly, that you know we've moved as a society from being very Emirati oriented to being oriented towards the community of the Emirates. So we now treat everybody as a member of, as part of the community of the Emirates within the country. It's so we're providing a lot of support to anybody who's creative and innovative and hardworking.
How is the UAE working toward more democracy?
Yeah, good question as well. And we've certainly got a number of institutions that demonstrate democratic tendencies, and that's you know the Federal National Council, and within each emirate there are different councils as well. We're more of a traditionalist society, and you know, I think what we've seen of a technical approach to democracy hasn't really kind of encouraged us to be that focused on the technicalities. And so, I mean, one example is the parliament of neighboring country Kuwait. And Kuwait has been in different ways, it's not been able to achieve the same kind of economic progress that we have, and partly because of sort of logjam in their or stalemate in their parliament. And so we recognize that we have what we call the Majlis system, which is a system whereby people will come into a large room where there will be a large discussion. We're also a very consensus-oriented society by tradition, and consensus-oriented societies tend to be also follow the leader. I don't, had we had a kind of a referendum on peace with Israel, I doubt that it would have happened. However, once the decision was made, you get support for things like that. So I think it's a long-term approach where we balance the stability of our society with kind of the aspirations of pretty much everybody.
What are your thoughts and concerns about the young Muslims that are seeing the Taliban now, who appear to be more savvy on social media and being acknowledged by global leaders?
I don't know about the young Muslims. I mean, I must admit, I was a bit surprised at how quickly the international media started referring to the Taliban as the new government, the incoming government, and we're looking to see their cabinet kind of makeup, and are they going to stick to their words? And they have now a spokesperson. So there was almost a kind of a legitimization of the Taliban even before they came into power. It's early days. I mean, things are not looking particularly optimistic on what they're doing. Simply with the prevention of women going to university or teaching in universities, and the issue of girls getting an education, that is not very promising, to be honest. And whether they're going to be media savvy, what is the program that they're presenting? I don't think that political Islam has succeeded over the last 20 years in demonstrating its benefits to young Muslims and young Arabs in particular.
How is the UAE government dealing with the thorny issue in some corners of climate change?
Gosh, yeah, that's I think we will be hosting the COP conference in a couple of years, actually. Yeah. So we're very keen on this subject. We have a very forceful climate change envoy who headed up the Renewable Energies Center that we set up in 2006. It's exceptionally important for us as a country, simply because it's already very, very hot. We don't need it to be any hotter. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to work with other countries on figuring out how to move towards a kind of a renewable space. We've made huge investments across the world in renewable energy, not just in the Emirates. I think we have the largest renewable energy solar power plant in the world. And I'm also responsible in my job for our relationship with Central America and the Caribbean, and we have many different projects there setting up renewable energy operations. So we are very committed to it, but there's a limit that we can do as a small country.
Sorry, my questions just jumped around. Will the United Arab Emirates provide transparency and openly welcome representatives of international human rights organizations?
We just set up a human rights institution in the Emirates, which is headed by our ex-Minister of State for Foreign Affairs, Dr. Anwar Gargash. I think the reality is that we're going to want to make sure that the view of our human rights situation is as objective as possible. And that's not to, sort of suggest that these human rights organizations are not objective, but we want to be able to say, look, this is where we are, this is what we've done. We take these issues extremely seriously. Now, we're also a society that tends not to take public criticism too well, and that, is potentially a cultural issue. So many of the disagreements that you'll find across the Arab world are expressed privately, not publicly, and it's less of an adversarial system than perhaps the Western organizations like. We do, as I say, we do continue to take these issues very seriously.
How have the Abraham Accords evolved with the new Biden administration?
Something, I think that the Abraham Accords are our accords with the Israelis, right? I mean, these are our agreement with the Israelis. And I don't think that a change in US administration or a change in tone or a change in kind of enthusiasm is going to change our enthusiasm and our commitment to the Accords. And I think I've spoken to some Israeli friends about this, and they've said, is this going to change? Are you going to renege on these agreements? No, we made a sovereign decision. And that sovereign decision will remain. In a sense, we've already paid the price up front in terms of breaking a taboo. And we're certainly not going to turn back on that now.
Thank you. What are the Emirates doing about Yemen?
Okay, so the Yemen has always been a difficult issue. Over the years, we've pumped billions of dollars into supporting civil society in Yemen and providing aid. We were involved militarily with the Saudis in Yemen, but we withdrew, I think it's about 2 years ago now. And we continue to provide aid as we can. Our concern is for a stable Yemen and for a peaceful Yemen, and a Yemen that actually represents a little more, rather than the Houthi government represents its diverse groups properly.
Thank you. Thinking back to the Arab Spring, how much has the ground shifted in the Middle East since?
It's also these are very good questions.
We got smart audience members.
Well, I mean, in a way, there's a certain perspective that says that the Arab Spring cost the Arab world, hundreds of billions of dollars in kind of wasted resources. It's difficult to say. I mean, there's the change in government or change in the situation in Tunisia. I think what the Arab Spring has done has created a sense of urgency amongst leaders in the region on trying to find good solutions, effective solutions, solutions where our society and economy will catch up with our demography. I think there's much greater awareness of aspirations, right? What do people really want? How can governments provide a sense of meaning, or at least get out of the way in other people's efforts to find a sense of meaning? So, I personally don't think that the Arab Spring's record was brilliant, and no, I think in the Emirates we are trying to design a system that allows for all of the particularities of the Arab world and the Middle East, but at the same time allows for a connection with a global kind of mindset. So health, education, opportunity, these are the things that we're really focused on, and we would hope that they focus on in other parts of the Arab world as well.
This will be my final question, and then I'll have Daniel come back. Some governments in the Middle East repress free speech and dissent of any kind. Is the United Arab Emirates' freedom to dissent limited or boundless?
No, certainly not boundless. And I've spent a lot of time also thinking about this over the last 10 years. Speech has a different effect in different places. And when you think of deep kind of tribal affiliations, and just to give you an example, we have a contest for poetry in the region. And the poet who wins usually is the one not who's the best poet, but who has most tribe members voting for him. So people are very tribal at a kind of deep level. And you can't just stand up and say things as though you're the only individual in society and expect no repercussions. And the repercussions can be terrible. With sufficient amounts of wrong speech, you can tear a country to pieces. We, within the country, within our society, we know what the limits are in a sense. We know what threatens the social fabric. And the threshold is much lower in our part of the world to do that. And that's why when we talk about free speech, we also talk about responsible speech, because we know the consequences of what the consequences that our words carry. And I'm not sure if people understand the power of the Arabic language, and in particular in parts of the world where there are very few resources and all you've got are your wits about you. The destructive power of words, but also the constructive power of words. And for the time being, we are still figuring out our way in how we can express ourselves in a constructive manner in a very, very kind of dynamic world. So I'm all about I'm very much in favor of the freest speech, but I'm also very much in favor of making sure that we don't destroy ourselves in the process.
Yeah, something our country is struggling with right now a little bit. So it's a very thoughtful answer. Daniel, I want to have you come back if you can. And I actually have a question for you, Daniel, as well, from one of our audience members, if I can put him on the spot. The question for you, Daniel, years ago, RAND did a plan for a two-state solution. Is it dead, or do you hope to make it work with the UAE?
That's a great question. And we have, I've not talked with the ambassador about it, so I don't want to put him on the spot. We did have a plan. It was a visionary plan called the ARC.
I know, I read it.
It's, I still think it's probably one of the most audacious plans. The Palestinians supported it at the time, and we had a price tag on it. The politics of getting it to work were always complicated. And it's, this is an area you know well, but certainly, I think certainly would be something we'd love to promote again, because I think it is still viable, even given the political situation. And it's potentially the only viable solution that allows the creation of one Palestinian state without infringing at all on Israeli territory. And just with that, I just want to thank you and thank Ambassador Ghobash. I would hoped we'd have a chance to talk about the third line. My brother is a contemporary artist. He's a fine artist. This is why I have the donut over my shoulder. It was deliberate. I was hoping we could have a chance to talk about that, but maybe someday I can come visit the exhibition.
With pleasure, please do.
Awesome. Well, Daniel and Ambassador Ghobash, thank you so much for this wonderful discussion. And I know this December, the UAE will be celebrating its Golden Jubilee. So we wish good things for all of you. And yeah, hopefully as things open back up, we can host you here in person in Los Angeles. So thank you to both of you.
And may I say, Daniel and Jessica, thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity. And to all of your viewers, thank you so much for having given me the time to speak. And I hope I haven't upset or offended anybody unduly or unnecessarily.
It's not a good webinar if somebody isn't offended, right?
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
To our audience, if you'd like to support the Council and programs like these and to learn about our upcoming events, please visit our website at lawacth.org. This Friday, we'll be hosting Professor Gordon Flake of the U.S. Asia Perth Center, and he'll be talking about the U.S. Australia-UK deal that's happened recently, and also our relationships with the Australians in the Indo-Pacific. So tune into that. And thank you so much for joining us today. And with all of your great questions, we hope to see you next time. Have a great day.